The evening sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban streets. Marcus Johnson navigated his car through the winding roads, humming softly to the tune playing on the radio. He had just picked up dinner from his favorite spot, a small family-owned restaurant known for its mouth-watering fried chicken and creamy macaroni salad. The aroma of warm food filled the car, making him smile as he thought about relaxing at home after a long day. Marcus lived in this neighborhood, a place he chose because it felt peaceful, like somewhere a person could truly unwind. Trees lined the streets, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Kids rode bicycles along sidewalks and older folks sat on porches, chatting over cups of coffee or lemonade. It was the kind of community that seemed untouched by chaos, where life moved at a slower pace. But Marcus knew better than to take appearances at face value. Even here, beneath the surface of calm, tensions simmered. As he turned onto his street, something unexpected caught his attention in the rearview mirror. Blue and red lights flashed behind him, reflecting off the windshield. His stomach tightened, slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm. Traffic stops weren't uncommon, especially in neighborhoods like this one where local police liked to patrol. Still, there was always an uneasy feeling that came with being pulled over, particularly when you were a black man driving alone. Marcus signaled and pulled over smoothly, parking near the curb. He turned off the engine and placed both hands on the steering wheel, exactly where they were supposed to be. His heart thudded in his chest, not out of guilt but out of experience. He'd been stopped before, sometimes for no reason other than fitting someone's idea of suspicion. Each time he reminded himself to stay composed, to follow every rule perfectly, even though deep down he hated how unfair it all felt. A few seconds passed before the officer approached. Through the window, Marcus saw the figure of Officer Greg Hargrove stepping toward the car. Hargrove was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scowl permanently etched onto his face. Everyone in the area knew him, or at least knew of him. He wasn't exactly popular among residents, especially those who didn't look like him. Stories circulated about his harsh tactics, his tendency to target people of color during routine patrols. Some called him a bully, others avoided him altogether. Hargrove tapped on the driver's side window sharply, startling Marcus despite his efforts to remain calm. Rolling down the window, Marcus greeted him politely. "Evening, officer," he said, keeping his tone friendly. "Is everything okay?" Instead of responding, Hargrove leaned closer, peering into the car with narrowed eyes. His gaze swept over the interior, taking in the fast food bag on the passenger seat, the phone resting in the cup holder, the dashboard free of clutter. Then his eyes landed on Marcus, scrutinizing him as if searching for some hidden flaw. "License and registration?" Hargrove barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "Sure thing," Marcus replied evenly. He reached slowly for his wallet, careful not to make any sudden movements. Experience had taught him that even the smallest gesture could be misinterpreted. As he handed over the documents, he noticed Hargrove's posture stiffen further. The officer glanced at the license briefly before handing it back without comment. But then, instead of returning to his patrol car to run the information, Hargrove did something unusual. Without warning, he ordered Marcus to step out of the vehicle. "Get out of the car," he demanded, his tone escalating. Confused but compliant, Marcus opened the door and stepped outside. Before he could fully process what was happening, Hargrove grabbed him roughly by the arm and shoved him against the hood of the car. The metal was still warm from the day's heat, pressing uncomfortably against Marcus's chest. Instinctively, Marcus tried to steady himself, but Hargrove's grip tightened painfully. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, his voice strained, but steady. "Did I do something wrong?" Hargrove ignored the question. Instead, he pressed the barrel of his gun firmly against the back of Marcus's head. The cold steel sent a shiver down Marcus's spine, but he forced himself not to react. He'd heard stories like this before, horror stories shared among friends and family members, but never imagined it would happen to him. Not here, not in this supposedly safe neighborhood. "You don't belong here," Hargrove growled, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "What are you doing in this part of town?" Marcus swallowed hard, trying to keep his emotions in check. He wanted to argue, to point out that he lived just 2 blocks away, but he knew better. Arguing wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on breathing deeply, grounding himself in the moment. His mind raced, sifting through possible ways to defuse the situation. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Not with a gun pointed at his head. For a brief moment, Marcus considered the absurdity of it all. Here he was, a law-abiding citizen simply trying to get home after work, and yet he was being treated like a criminal. None of this made sense, and yet deep down he understood why it was happening. It wasn't about what he'd done. It was about who he was. That realization stung more than anything else. Despite the danger, Marcus refused to let fear consume him. Slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "You don't know who I am," he said, his voice calm but firm. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. For a split second, Hargrove hesitated, unsure how to respond. But the pause was fleeting. With renewed aggression, the officer tightened his hold on the gun, pressing it harder against Marcus's skull. Marcus closed his eyes, focusing on the sound of his own heartbeat. He knew this moment would define what happened next. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and things could spiral out of control. But giving in to fear wasn't an option, not tonight, not ever. The weight of the gun pressed firmly against Marcus's head, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. His thoughts raced, but his body remained still, a deliberate act of self-control honed over years of navigating situations, where one wrong move could mean disaster. He knew that reacting impulsively would only escalate things further. Instead, he focused on keeping his breathing steady and his voice calm, even as his mind screamed for him to fight back or run. "Officer." Hargrove stood behind him, his breathing heavy, almost labored, betraying the tension in his own body. The officer's grip on the weapon didn't waver, nor did his tone soften when he spoke again. "Don't try to play games with me," Hargrove snapped, his words laced with suspicion. "Who are you, really? What are you doing here?" Marcus exhaled slowly, choosing his next words carefully. He understood that this wasn't just about being pulled over anymore. It was about power. Hargrove wanted to assert dominance, to make Marcus feel small and insignificant, but Marcus refused to let him win. In that moment, he decided to shift the dynamic, to turn the tables subtly without provoking outright hostility. "You think I'm lying?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. "Go ahead, check my ID. Run my name through your system. See what comes up." There was something about the way he said it, a quiet confidence that seemed out of place in such a tense situation. It threw Hargrove off balance, if only slightly. For a brief moment, the officer hesitated, his brow furrowing as though unsure how to respond. Hargrove tightened his grip on Marcus's shoulder, pulling him upright but keeping the gun trained on him. "Don't get smart with me," the officer growled, shoving Marcus toward the patrol car. "We'll see who you really are." As Marcus stood by the squad car, his hands resting lightly on its roof, he felt the absurdity of the situation wash over him. Here he was, dressed casually in jeans and a button-up shirt, holding a bag of takeout food, and yet he was being treated like a dangerous criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him, but beneath the frustration and fear, there was also anger, and anger born not just from this moment but from years of similar encounters, of being judged before given a chance to prove himself innocent. Hargrove rummaged through Marcus's wallet, flipping through cards and receipts until he found the driver's license. He studied it closely, squinting at the photo before glancing back at Marcus. Then his eyes landed on another card tucked neatly inside, a government-issued identification badge bearing the insignia of the U.S. Department of Defense. Hargrove frowned, his expression shifting from aggression to confusion. "What's this?" Hargrove demanded, holding the card up as though it might bite him. "Some kind of fake badge?" Marcus allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "Does it look fake to you?" he asked, his tone measured but tinged with sarcasm. "If you're not sure, maybe you should call someone who can verify it for you." Hargrove scowled, clearly irritated by Marcus's composure. Most people in this position would be pleading, crying, or visibly shaking, but not Marcus. His calm demeanor unnerved the officer, making him question whether he'd misjudged the situation entirely. Still, pride wouldn't let Hargrove back down. Instead, he doubled down, grabbing his radio and barking orders to dispatch. "I need you to run a name for me," he said gruffly. "Marcus Johnson, check for any flags or alerts." While waiting for a response, Hargrove kept his gaze fixed on Marcus, studying him like a predator sizing up its prey. "You better hope nothing comes back on you," he muttered under his breath. But Marcus didn't respond. He simply stood. There, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances, his face unreadable. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Finally, the crackle of the radio broke the silence. Dispatch confirmed that Marcus's ID was legitimate, and more importantly, that he was employed by the Department of Defense. The news hit Hargrove like a punch to the gut. His jaw clenched, and his hand instinctively moved away from his holster, though the gun remained within reach. "Well?" Marcus prompted, raising an eyebrow. "Anything interesting come up?" Hargrove ignored the question, his focus now split between maintaining control of the situation and figuring out how to save face. He turned away briefly, muttering into the radio again. "Patch me through to Colonel Reynolds," he said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Tell her it's urgent." Colonel Sarah Reynolds was a name Marcus recognized immediately. She was a high-ranking official in the Pentagon, someone he worked with regularly. Her reputation preceded her, sharp, no nonsense, and fiercely protective of her team. If anyone could put Hargrove in his place, it was her. Marcus suppressed a smirk as he imagined the conversation that was about to unfold. When the call connected, Hargrove held the phone awkwardly, pressing it to his ear while keeping one eye on Marcus. "Colonel Reynolds?" he began, his tone uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've got a situation here. A man named Marcus Johnson claims he works under your command." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a crisp, authoritative voice. "This is Colonel Reynolds." "Who am I speaking with?" Officer Greg Hargrove, ma'am," he stammered. "Local PD. I stopped Mr. Johnson earlier tonight and why exactly did you stop him?" Colonel Reynolds interrupted, her tone icy. Hargrove flinched, glancing nervously at Marcus before answering. He fit a description. "Suspicious activity, ma'am." Marcus couldn't help but roll his eyes at the blatant lie. Suspicious activity? What suspicious activity? Driving while black, apparently. Colonel Reynolds didn't miss a beat. "Let me make something crystal clear, Officer Hargrove. Marcus Johnson is a senior cybersecurity consultant working directly under my supervision. He advises top-level officials on matters of national security. Do you understand what I'm saying? You've detained someone whose work impacts the safety of our country." Hargrove's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't," Colonel Reynolds cut him off sharply. "And because of your negligence, I expect a full report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Hargrove replied, his shoulders slumping in defeat. When the call ended, an uncomfortable silence settled between the two men. Hargrove looked utterly defeated, his earlier bravado replaced by shame and embarrassment. Marcus, however, remained composed, his expression neutral. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "So," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel, "what happens now?" Hargrove avoided meeting his gaze, fumbling with the paperwork as he prepared to release Marcus. "You're free to go," he muttered, practically throwing the documents at him. "Sorry for the inconvenience." Marcus took the papers silently, slipping them into his pocket. He didn't say anything, not yet. As he walked back to his car, he felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Relief that the ordeal was over, anger at the injustice of it all, and a growing determination to do something about it. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who didn't have the privilege of calling the Pentagon to bail them out. As he drove away, the weight of the evening lingered with him. He glanced at the fast food bag on the passenger seat, the macaroni salad now lukewarm and unappetizing. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to exhale fully, letting the tension leave his body. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Far from it. The drive home was quiet, but Marcus's mind was anything but. The adrenaline that had coursed through him during the encounter with Officer Hargrove was starting to fade, leaving behind a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, and a simmering sense of injustice. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated the familiar streets, replaying the events in his head. The flashing lights, the gun pressed against his skull, the dismissive tone of the officer. It all felt surreal, now like a scene from someone else's life, but it wasn't. It had happened to him, and he knew it could happen again, to him or to someone else. When Marcus finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house he called home. It was a modest place. Nothing extravagant, but it represented stability. A safe haven where he could unwind after long days consulting for the Department of Defense. Tonight, though, it didn't feel quite as safe anymore. The neighborhood that once seemed peaceful now carried an undercurrent of tension, a reminder that danger could lurk anywhere, even in places you thought were secure. He stepped out of the car, grabbing the bag of takeout food almost absent-mindedly. As he unlocked the front door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw several missed calls and text messages from friends and colleagues who had somehow already heard about the incident. Word traveled fast, especially when something as shocking as this occurred. Marcus sighed, slipping the phone back into his pocket without responding. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Not tonight. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. Marcus dropped the food onto the kitchen counter and leaned against it, running a hand over his face. His thoughts drifted back to Colonel Reynolds's voice on the phone, the sharp authority she commanded, the way she'd dismantled Hargrove's excuses with precision. Part of him felt grateful for her intervention, but another part couldn't shake the bitterness of needing validation from someone in power just to be treated like a human being. As he stood there lost in thought, his phone buzzed again. This time he glanced at the screen. It was a direct message from Colonel Reynolds herself. Reluctantly, he opened it. "Marcus, I heard what happened tonight. Are you okay?" Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. Marcus appreciated her concern, but he also knew this wasn't just about him personally. It was bigger than that. He typed out a quick reply. "I'm fine, ma'am. Thank you for stepping in." Before he could set the phone down, another message popped up. "This isn't right," she wrote. "No one should have to go through what you did. Let's talk tomorrow. We need to figure out how to prevent this from happening again." Marcus stared at the screen, reading her words over and over. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe this could lead to real change. Maybe his experience could shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. But then reality crept back in. Change wouldn't come easily, and it certainly wouldn't come overnight. Still, he owed it to himself and to others to try. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, unable to sleep past dawn. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind, refusing to let him rest. After showering and dressing in clean clothes, he brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through news headlines on his laptop. To his surprise, the story of his encounter with Hargrove was already making waves online. Someone must have recorded part of the interaction, because snippets of video were circulating on social media platforms. In grainy footage, Marcus could see himself standing calmly by the patrol car while Hargrove loomed nearby, visibly agitated. Comments poured in beneath the videos, ranging from outrage to disbelief. Some people praised Marcus for remaining composed under pressure, calling him a hero. Others criticized Hargrove's behavior, demanding accountability. And then there were the skeptics, the ones questioning whether Marcus had done something to provoke the officer, despite the lack of evidence. Reading their words made Marcus's chest tighten. Even now, even with proof of his innocence, some people still doubted him simply because of the color of his skin. By mid-morning, Marcus received a call from Colonel Reynolds. She wasted no time getting to the point. "I've reviewed the details of last night," she began, her tone serious. "Officer Hargrove's actions were unacceptable. We can't let this slide." "I agree," Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair. "But what are we going to do about it? Filing a complaint might get him suspended, but that won't fix the bigger problem." Reynolds paused, considering his words. "You're right," she admitted. "This goes beyond one bad cop. That's why I want to bring your story to the attention of higher-ups, not just within the Department of Defense, but across federal agencies. If we can use your experience to highlight the flaws in policing, maybe we can push for meaningful reform." Marcus nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'm willing to help however I can," he said firmly. "But I want to make sure we're doing more than just talking. People are tired of empty promises." "Understood," Reynolds responded. "Let's start by drafting a statement. You'll address the press later today. We'll frame this as a call for accountability and transparency. Are you comfortable with that?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. Speaking publicly meant opening himself up to scrutiny, criticism, and possibly even threats. But he also knew that staying silent wouldn't solve anything. "Yes," he said finally. "If it means preventing this from happening to someone else, I'll do it." Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself standing in front of a podium, surrounded by reporters and cameras. The room buzzed with energy, everyone eager to hear his side of the story. Colonel Reynolds stood beside him, offering silent support. As Marcus adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd, he took a deep breath, reminding himself why he was there. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and last night I experienced something no one should ever have to endure. I was stopped by a police officer in my own neighborhood, treated as a threat simply because of the color of my skin. Thankfully, I was able to verify my identity and avoid further harm, but I know that not everyone is so fortunate." The room fell silent as Marcus continued. "What happened to me isn't unique. Across this country, countless individuals face similar situations every single day. Many aren't given the chance to explain themselves. Many don't survive. That's why I'm speaking out now, not just for myself, but for those who can't speak for themselves." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "We need accountability, we need transparency, and most importantly, we need action. Law enforcement agencies must implement reforms that prioritize justice and fairness for all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or background. Anything less is unacceptable." When Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic din. But Marcus didn't answer them immediately. Instead, he stepped away from the podium, signaling that the press conference was over. As he walked out of the room, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it head-on. Back at home that evening, Marcus collapsed onto the couch, his body heavy with fatigue. The day had been emotionally draining, but it also marked the beginning of something important. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, a mission to fight for change, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved better. As he closed his eyes, he reminded himself of one thing. This wasn't the end of the battle. It was only the beginning. The days following Marcus's press conference were a whirlwind of activity. News outlets picked up his story, amplifying his call for accountability and reform. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Yalai Police Reform Now," as people across the country rallied behind him. Supporters shared their own stories of discrimination and police misconduct, creating a tidal wave of voices demanding change. For Marcus, it was both empowering and overwhelming. He had expected attention, but not on this scale. Strangers reached out to thank him for speaking up, while critics questioned his motives and accused him of exaggerating the situation. Through it all, Marcus remained focused, reminding himself why he'd chosen to step into the spotlight. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Hargrove found himself at the center of a storm. Internal Affairs launched an investigation into his actions during the traffic stop. scrutinizing not only the incident with Marcus, but also his history of racially motivated behavior. Local activists organized protests outside the police station, holding signs that read "Accountability starts now" and "No justice, no peace." The pressure mounted quickly, forcing the department to take swift action. Within days, Hargrove was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the inquiry. Despite the backlash, Hargrove refused to back down. In interviews with local news stations, he defended his actions, claiming he had been following protocol and acting on reasonable suspicion. "I didn't know who he was," Hargrove argued, his tone defiant. "Anyone in my position would have done the same thing." His comments sparked heated debates online, with many pointing out the flaws in his logic. Reasonable suspicion, they argued, shouldn't equate to treating someone as a criminal without evidence. Others noted how quickly Hargrove's demeanor changed once Marcus revealed his connection to the Pentagon, a clear indication that bias played a role in the encounter. As the public discourse intensified, Marcus received a phone call from Colonel Sarah Reynolds. Her voice carried a mix of urgency and determination when she spoke. "Marcus, we need to escalate this," she said. "This isn't just about one officer, it's about systemic issues within law enforcement. I've arranged a meeting with top officials from the Department of Justice. They're willing to hear your story and discuss potential reforms." Marcus listened intently, his heart pounding. The idea of presenting his case to such high-ranking individuals was daunting, but he knew it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. "When is the meeting?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," Reynolds replied. "We'll prep you tonight. Just remember, you're not alone in this. We're going to make sure your voice is heard." That evening, Marcus met with Colonel Reynolds and a small team of advisors in a secure conference room at the Pentagon. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful, with everyone aware of the stakes involved. Reynolds led the discussion, outlining the key points Marcus needed to emphasize during the meeting. "Focus on the broader implications," she advised. "Explain how incidents like yours erode trust between communities and law enforcement. Highlight the need for training programs that address implicit bias and promote de-escalation tactics." One of the advisors chimed in, adding, "And don't shy away from sharing personal details. Let them see the human side of this issue. Numbers and statistics are important, but stories stick with people." Marcus nodded, absorbing their advice. As the hours ticked by, he rehearsed his presentation multiple times, refining his delivery until it felt natural. By the time the session ended, exhaustion tugged at his body, but a sense of readiness settled over him. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, he was advocating for a better future. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the Department of Justice building, flanked by Colonel Reynolds and her team. The imposing structure loomed ahead, its marble facade gleaming under the mid-morning sun. Stepping inside, Marcus felt a surge of nerves but pushed them aside. He reminded himself that he wasn't there for himself. He was there for everyone who deserved fairness and dignity. The meeting took place in a large conference room filled with high-ranking officials, including representatives from the DOJ, the FBI, and various civil rights organizations. As Marcus took his seat at the table, he noticed the weight of their collective gaze. These were people whose decisions shaped policies affecting millions of lives. The responsibility resting on his shoulders felt immense, but he steadied himself with a deep breath. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus stood up, his posture confident yet respectful. He began by recounting the events of that fateful night. The routine traffic stop, the gun pressed against his head, the moment he realized he might not survive simply because of who he was. His voice trembled slightly as he described the fear and anger he'd felt, but he maintained composure, ensuring his words resonated with authenticity. "I'm here today not because I want revenge or retribution," Marcus continued, his tone firm. "I'm here because what happened to me isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that has destroyed lives, shattered families, and divided communities. And it's a pattern that won't stop unless we take bold action." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Law enforcement officers have a difficult job, and most of them do it honorably. But the system they operate within is broken. It allows biases to go unchecked and abuses of power to persist. That's why we need comprehensive reforms. Better training, stricter accountability measures, and increased transparency. We owe it to ourselves and to future generations to create a system that protects everyone equally. As Marcus concluded his remarks, the room fell silent. The officials exchanged glances, some nodding thoughtfully while others scribbled notes furiously. When it came time for questions, the discussion turned lively, with participants probing deeper into specific aspects of Marcus's proposal. They asked about funding for reform initiatives, strategies for community engagement, and ways to measure progress over time. Marcus answered each question thoroughly, drawing on both his personal experiences and research he'd conducted in preparation for the meeting. By the end of the session, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. While no immediate solutions emerged, the officials expressed genuine interest in pursuing meaningful change. One representative even promised to draft legislation aimed at addressing systemic inequities in policing practices. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Marcus left the meeting knowing he'd planted seeds that could grow into something transformative. Later that day, as Marcus reflected on the whirlwind of events, he realized how much had shifted since the night of the traffic stop. What had started as a terrifying ordeal had evolved into a catalyst for action. He understood now that his privilege, not just his government affiliation but also his education, resources, and platform, had given him a unique opportunity to advocate for those without a voice. But he also recognized that real change required more than speeches and meetings. It demanded sustained effort, collaboration, and courage. As he sat in his living room that evening, scrolling through messages of support pouring in from strangers, Marcus made a silent vow. He wouldn't let this momentum fade. Whether through policy work, public speaking, or grassroots organizing, he would dedicate himself to dismantling the systems that perpetuated injustice. Because if one person's story could spark a movement, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a brighter tomorrow. The weeks following Marcus's meeting at the Department of Justice were a blur of activity. News outlets continued to cover his story, amplifying his call for reform and turning him into an unexpected public figure. Strangers stopped him on the street to offer words of encouragement or share their own experiences with law enforcement. Social media buzzed with discussions about systemic racism, police accountability, and the urgent need for change. For Marcus, it was both inspiring and overwhelming. While he appreciated the support, he couldn't ignore the growing weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice. Meanwhile, the fallout from Officer Greg Hargrove's actions intensified. The internal investigation revealed a troubling pattern of misconduct in his record, including multiple complaints of racial profiling and excessive force. Activists seized on this information, organizing protests outside the police station and demanding his immediate termination. Local politicians joined the chorus, calling for sweeping reforms within the department. Under mounting pressure, the police chief announced that Hargrove would be fired and barred from working in law enforcement again. It was a small victory, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough. One bad officer removed from the system wouldn't fix the deeper issues plaguing policing as a whole. In the midst of all this, Marcus received another phone call, this time from Colonel Sarah Reynolds. Her tone was urgent yet hopeful as she spoke. "Marcus, we've made progress," she said. "The DOJ is drafting new guidelines for police departments nationwide. They're focusing on training programs to address implicit bias, stricter accountability measures, and increased transparency. But they want you involved every step of the way." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. Being part of such a monumental effort was an incredible opportunity, but it also meant stepping further into the spotlight, a place he still wasn't entirely comfortable occupying. "I'm ready to help," he replied after a moment of thought. "But I don't want this to just be about me. We need voices from the community, especially those who've been directly impacted by these systems." Reynolds agreed. "That's exactly what we're planning," We're setting up town halls across the country where people can share their stories and provide input on the reforms. You'll play a key role in facilitating those conversations. Over the next few months, Marcus traveled extensively, attending meetings with policymakers, speaking at conferences, and participating in community forums. Each event brought its own challenges and rewards. At one town hall in Chicago, a young woman stood up to recount how her brother had been killed during a routine traffic stop. Her voice trembled with emotion as she described the pain of losing someone so suddenly and unjustly. "We need more than just new rules," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We need officers who see us as human beings, not threats." Her words struck a chord with Marcus, reminding him why this work mattered so deeply. He responded with heartfelt empathy, acknowledging the pain in the room while emphasizing the importance of collective action. "Change won't happen overnight," he told the crowd, "but together we can build a future where no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin." At another forum in Atlanta, Marcus met a retired police officer named James Carter, who had dedicated his post-retirement years to advocating for reform within law enforcement. Carter shared insights into the challenges officers faced, from inadequate training to toxic workplace cultures that perpetuated harmful behaviors. "It's not just about punishing bad cops," Carter explained. "It's about creating an environment where good cops feel empowered to speak up when they see something wrong." Their conversation sparked a partnership between Marcus and Carter, leading to the creation of a joint initiative aimed at bridging the gap between communities and law enforcement. Together, they developed workshops designed to foster mutual understanding and trust. Officers learned firsthand accounts from residents about the impact of discriminatory practices, while community members gained insight into the pressures and limitations officers often faced. Though the process was slow and sometimes contentious, the dialogues planted seeds of hope. Back home, Marcus found himself grappling with the emotional toll of his advocacy work. Late nights spent preparing presentations, fielding calls from reporters, and responding to messages from supporters left him physically and mentally drained. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that maybe he wasn't making a difference, that maybe the system was too broken to fix. During those times, he leaned on his family and friends for support, drawing strength from their unwavering belief in him. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it and read, "Thank you for standing up. My son came home safe today because of people like you." The simplicity of the message moved him deeply. It reminded him that even small victories mattered, that saving one life, protecting one family, was worth every ounce of effort. As the months passed, the momentum behind the reform movement grew stronger. Legislators introduced bills inspired by Marcus's proposals, mandating body cameras for all officers, establishing independent oversight boards, and requiring regular anti-bias training. Community organizations partnered with schools to educate young people about civic engagement and activism. Slowly but surely, the pieces of a better system began falling into place. But Marcus never lost sight of the bigger picture. He understood that true change required vigilance and persistence. In speeches and interviews, he reminded audiences that progress was a marathon, not a sprint. "We've taken important steps," he often said, "but our work isn't finished. Every policy we pass, every program we implement must be followed by accountability. If we let our guard down, the old ways will creep back in." By the end of the year, Marcus's efforts earned him recognition far beyond what he'd imagined. Award ceremonies honored him as a champion of civil rights, and magazines featured him on their covers, hailing him as a voice of reason in turbulent times. Yet despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. He declined lucrative offers to write books or host TV shows, choosing instead to focus on grassroots initiatives and policy advocacy. On New Year's Eve, Marcus stood on his porch once again, reflecting on the journey he'd undertaken. The road ahead was still long, filled with obstacles and uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a sense of cautious optimism. Change was possible if people refused to give up, and Marcus Johnson had no intention of giving up anytime soon. Months turned into a year, and Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never could have predicted. What began as a terrifying encounter with Officer Hargrove had evolved into a mission far greater than himself. He was no longer just a cybersecurity consultant working quietly behind the scenes. He had become a public figure, a symbol of resilience and hope for countless individuals seeking justice. His days were now filled with meetings, speeches, and collaborations aimed at dismantling systemic inequities within law enforcement. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Marcus remained deeply aware that the fight was far from over. One crisp morning, Marcus found himself seated in a conference room at the Pentagon, preparing to present his findings to a group of high-ranking military officials and policymakers. The room buzzed with anticipation as attendees shuffled through papers and adjusted their ties. For Marcus, this moment represented a culmination of months of hard work, researching, consulting with experts, and gathering input from communities across the country. He had poured his heart into crafting a comprehensive plan for police reform, one that balanced accountability with compassion, transparency with practicality. As he stood up to address the room, Marcus took a deep breath, allowing himself a brief moment to reflect on how far he'd come. Just over a year ago, he'd been an ordinary man simply trying to get home after picking up dinner. Now, he was standing before some of the most powerful people in the nation, armed not with weapons or intimidation, but with data, stories, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice steady and confident. "I want to start by thanking all of you for being here today. This is more than just a meeting. It's a step toward creating a safer, fairer future for everyone. But before we dive into specifics, I want to remind us why we're doing this. It's easy to get lost in policies and procedures, but behind every statistic is a person, a father, a mother, a child, a friend, who deserves to live without fear." He paused, letting his words settle over the room. Then, using a projector screen, he displayed images and videos collected during his travels. Protesters holding signs calling for justice, families mourning loved ones lost to police violence, officers sharing heartfelt apologies and pledging to do better. Each image told a story, painting a vivid picture of the pain and promise driving this movement. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame," Marcus continued. "It's about acknowledging where we've gone wrong and committing to do better. Our current system is broken, not because of bad people, but because of outdated practices and unchecked biases. To fix it, we need to rethink everything: how we train officers, how we hold them accountable, and how we rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve." Over the next hour, Marcus walked the audience through his proposals. First, he emphasized the importance of mandatory anti-bias training, not just as a one-time seminar, but as an ongoing process integrated into daily operations. "Bias isn't something you can eliminate overnight," he explained. "It's ingrained in all of us, shaped by years of societal conditioning. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Officers need tools to recognize their biases and strategies to counteract them in real time." Next, he outlined measures to increase transparency, including universal adoption of body cameras and independent oversight boards empowered to investigate misconduct. "Accountability starts with visibility," Marcus said firmly. "When officers know their actions are being recorded and reviewed, they're more likely to act responsibly. And when citizens see that complaints are taken seriously, trust begins to rebuild." Finally, he addressed the need for community engagement, proposing programs that brought officers and residents together in non-confrontational settings. "Policing shouldn't feel like an occupation," Marcus argued. "Officers should be seen as partners, not adversaries. Hosting open forums, organizing neighborhood cleanups, even playing basketball with local kids. These small interactions humanize both sides and lay the foundation for mutual respect." When Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Several officials approached him afterward, congratulating him on his presentation and expressing eagerness to implement his recommendations. One general shook his hand firmly, saying, "You've given us a roadmap, now it's on us to follow it." Outside the Pentagon, reporters gathered eagerly, hoping to capture sound bites from the day's events. Marcus stepped into the spotlight briefly, answering questions with the same calm authority that had defined his journey thus far. When asked whether he felt optimistic about the future, he smiled faintly. "Optimism isn't blind faith," he replied. "It's the belief that progress is possible if we stay committed. We've made strides, but there's still so much work to be done. Real change requires sustained effort, from lawmakers, from law enforcement, and from everyday citizens." In the weeks that followed, Marcus's proposals gained traction. Legislators introduced bills based on his framework, and pilot programs launched in cities nationwide. Community leaders praised the initiatives, crediting Marcus for sparking meaningful dialogue and action. Meanwhile, activists continued pushing for broader reforms, ensuring that momentum didn't fade. But Marcus knew better than to rest on his laurels. He returned to his consulting work at the Department of Defense, balancing his advocacy efforts with his professional responsibilities. Late nights became routine as he juggled presentations, policy drafts, and personal reflection. There were moments of doubt, times when the enormity of the task ahead threatened to overwhelm him. Yet whenever exhaustion crept in, he reminded himself of the faces he'd met along the way, the grieving mothers, the determined activists, the hopeful children. Their courage fueled his own. On a quiet evening several months later, Marcus sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. His phone buzzed with a notification, a news article announcing the passage of a landmark policing reform bill inspired by his work. As he read through the details, pride swelled in his chest, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Marcus leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes as a gentle breeze brushed against his face. He thought about the long road ahead, the battles yet to be fought, the hearts yet to be won. Change was slow, often frustratingly so, but it was also inevitable, driven by the relentless determination of those who refused to accept injustice. And Marcus Johnson? He intended to keep fighting for as long as it took.